Well, as the election approaches, the media coverage in America is becoming ever more febrile. For years now, many of Donald Trump's supporters have claimed that the so-called mainstream media doesn't give him a fair hearing, and consequently they turn to more sympathetic media outlets. So how is the media covering the election, and how big a part does it play in informing or persuading the electorate? Well, I'm joined from Washington by Ian Houston, who writes for The Herald and is an honorary professor at the University of the West of Scotland. Ian, traditional media has long played an important part in presidential elections, but how much does that matter now that candidates can speak directly to voters through social media?
Well, good morning, Graham. Nice to be with you. I appreciate your use of the word febrile there. It's an unprecedented 24/7 election coverage, of course, is fever-pitched, energized. Free press, watchdog is, of course, so important, holding individuals accountable for their actions and truth. I think I would say make a distinction. Mainstream media is characterized as what is deemed more normal, traditional, striving for balance, lacking distortion and sensationalism. But we do have these streams that expand out, that are smaller, that are still flowing. That's the alternative media. And they're ample and no end, in fact. And so alternative media challenge the dominant beliefs, maybe values of a culture, of course, and there are positives and negatives with that. But in the case of the election and the electoral politics, they trend in the direction of furthering polarization, I think.
Of course, social media doesn't hold people to account in the way that traditional media often does through interviews and debates. Is that a particular problem?
Yes, well, the impact of social media is massive. We're talking about in the early 2000s where social media platforms gained widespread popularity. Now in the 25 years or so since, we see a huge impact on elections. We have about 5.45 billion worldwide users on the internet, 67% of the global population. I think what I would say about social media is that it's individually empowering. If we think of that in the context of the election, individuals can be their own media outlet and may use it for various reasons. I hope people see it as a vehicle to uplift and encourage people, encourage charitable attitudes rather than deride or denigrate. And so we can be a positive voice, fair, kind, thoughtful, rather than the opposites. That's always going to be a challenge in the context of an election. But of course, it has a huge impact on not just elections in the U.S., but around the world.
And the way the media has changed has also altered how parties campaign. With the mainstream media, it was all about big picture, generalized messages. With social media and social media advertising, you can be a lot more targeted and give out different messages to different demographics.
Absolutely. That does lead to further polarization. And that's the challenge I think we face with this election, that people are many Americans are exhausted. They're increasingly frustrated by the extreme language, the demoralizing rhetoric being used by some candidates and the alternative media sources. Other Americans sort of feed on that. They even cook it up themselves and become obsessed with it. So I think there are positive and negatives with it, but the polarization, clearly, partisanship is a problem. And I think elections go on a long time. As you know, this election has gone on for about 2 years. So that's quite extraordinary, the length of time that families and individuals are inundated with all of these messages. And I think it can create a division between individuals. President Obama was talking about that yesterday. So I think we all are in a position to use what we have at our disposal to do positive things. Remembering the me in media, I often say the me in media is to empower ourselves to do positive things. And I think all of us have a duty and responsibility to do that now.
What is the capacity and indeed the opportunity for media to change people's minds? If, as you say, so many people are disaffected and turned off, and given how many other people's minds are already made up, what scope is there for the media having an effect on people's opinions?
Well, I think what I admire most about the best journalists and media actors, whether mainstream or alternative, is that they cover a story that educates and leads to helping people and caring for people, improving the environment that they live in. I think as we talk about immigration, for example, let's have a little bit more stories about what is causing the issue. So many stories, of course, appropriately are talking about the border, but let's talk about the countries themselves that people and family are fleeing, the dangers they face, the fear, the abject poverty. Migrants and immigrants are not criminals or hurting communities, committing these heinous crimes. They're really quiet heroes that are fleeing crime in broken communities and contributing. So I think more stories that media, whether mainstream or alternative, can put a focus on the substance of the reality of what is happening in the lives of immigrants and migrants and refugees, etc.
Okay, Ian Houston, who writes for the Herald and is also Honorary Professor at the University of the West of Scotland.